Tunisia's young democracy is facing its worst crisis in a decade. This after President Kais Saied ousted the government and suspended parliament with the help from the army. The move has been denounced as a coup by main opposition parties.
The sudden move by Tunisia's president to oust its prime minister, its government, and freeze parliament with help from the army has left Tunisia in turmoil in what opponents are denouncing as a coup. Those for and against President Kais Saied clashed violently outside of parliament Monday, with both sides appearing to throw stones. The country's largest political party, a moderate Islamist organization, has condemned the president's actions, which also include imposing a nightly curfew until August 27th. The president's dramatic moves follow months of deadlock and disputes, pitting him against Prime Minister Hichem Meshishi and a fragmented parliament as Tunisia descended into an economic crisis exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Meshishi on Monday responded by saying he cannot be a disruptive element and will hand over responsibility to whomever the president chooses. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the U.S. is concerned about the situation.
We are in touch at a senior level from both the White House and the State Department with Tunisian leaders to learn more about the situation, urge calm, and support Tunisian efforts to move forward in line with democratic principles.
U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price later said in a statement that the U.S. has been in contact with Tunisian government officials to stress that solutions to the country's problems should be based on its constitution. The United Nations is also urging restraint, and the European Union is asking all sides to respect Tunisia's constitution. Saied invoked emergency powers on Sunday night, marching with tens of thousands of his supporters. President since 2019, he campaigned as a political outsider against what he said was a corrupt and incompetent elite. Saied said the decision to oust Meshishi and suspend parliament for 30 days isn't a coup, but a constitutional and popular response to years of political deadlock and economic crisis, including high unemployment.
Well, to discuss the Tunisia situation further, we're now joined by the editor-in-chief of the UK-based international magazine, The Interest, and regular commentator on this programme on Middle East and North Africa, Afghanistan and Pakistan politics. Sami Hamdi, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the programme. Always good to have you.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, so Tunisia, a bit of turmoil, to say the least. Can the president do what he did? I mean, he's studied constitutional law, we're told, but it seems he's done everything but the things that he studied.
The president has announced that he's activated Article 80 of the Constitution. Article 80 allows him to take executive powers, but it does not allow him to suspend Parliament. In fact, Article 80 itself states that in times of crisis, when the president activates the emergency laws, then Parliament must be in perpetual sitting for the 30-day period. In other words, Parliament must continue to be in session so as to monitor the manner in which these powers are exercised. And this is why people are calling it a coup, because it is unconstitutional. There is nothing in the Constitution that allows the president to suspend the democratically elected parliament, a constitution that makes parliament supreme and removes the executive powers from the president after 60 years of dictatorship in which the president would rule by tawjihat or executive orders without any recourse to democratic institutions or parliament. And I think this is what is taking place, in that while Saied is asserting that it is constitutional what he has done, the reality is that even those who support him and even the constitutional lawyers in Tunisia and the experts on the constitution are almost unanimous in stating that the president has misinterpreted this article and he has used it essentially to launch a power grab after being frustrated since his election in 2019 by Parliament in his bid to rule Tunisia directly. It's important to stress that when President Kais Saied came to power, when he won the elections, when he won with a landslide, and we'll put that between a caveat, we'll come back to that in a bit, when President Saied won with a landslide, he announced that this was a mandate for him to rule directly, and he wanted to appoint a prime minister to rule by proxy. He wanted to remove the prerogative of the parliament to choose a prime minister and decide himself who should be prime minister and rule by proxy. And the parliament didn't let him do that. And what we're seeing today is a culmination of all those frustrations of his attempt to rule directly that the parliament has thwarted.
All right, so a lot of political machinations playing out, but why did the people take to the streets? Because it seems as if the politicians have taken advantage of that.
I think it's important to look at Tunisia for what it is as opposed to what everybody has wanted it to be. I've always argued that the narrative outside Tunisia bears no resemblance whatsoever to inside Tunisia, and I say that as a Tunisian. Outside Tunisia, the narrative has always been that this is a wonderful revolution, the Jasmine Revolution, an Arab Spring success. Suddenly everybody can vote, and that is what should be celebrated in and of itself, and that's the most paramount important thing that Tunisia has achieved. But inside Tunisia, there's been a sense of bewilderment with the democratic process, in that these Tunisians who are told that democracy is the greatest thing on God's green earth, they voted in 2011 and ended up poorer. They voted in 2014 and unemployment went up. They voted in 2019 and they find themselves still in even worse poverty than they were under the Ben Ali regime. So suddenly the question was not how do we protect democracy, but the question was democracy has failed where Ben Ali has failed. It failed to deliver jobs, it failed to deliver prosperity, it failed to deliver development, it failed to deliver equality of opportunity, it failed to deliver the elevation in the social status of the poorer individuals of society. It exacerbated regionalism. Therefore, all of the goals that the Arab Spring was supposed to achieve, democracy did not enable any of these goals to be achieved. And this is why we've been seeing increased tensions in recent time, in that in 2011 they voted for Nahda. Nahda failed. 2014 they voted for SABC, the other side of the spectrum. Again, that failed. 2019 they voted for an independent, so somebody outside the political spectrum. Tunisians are saying we tried everybody and nobody is bringing that success. And this is why the Tunisians have taken to the street, in that while the political elite are saying this is a democracy that you're supposed to defend, the people are saying you are the only ones benefiting from the democracy. And they took to the streets to protest the continued unemployment, the cutting off of water, the cutting off of electricity, the injustice, the corruption, the fact that we still need to pay a bribery in order to get things done, in order to oil the wheels of a very lethargic, bloated bureaucracy that only gets bigger and bigger as the parliament or the government tries to solve unemployment by creating new ghost public jobs that are not real jobs, but on paper they get a salary and they sit at the desk all day. It is this that drove people to protest. And Kais Saied, who's been planning this coup since he got elected, this is not a knee-jerk reaction to protest. Kais Saied has been planning this coup in plain sight. He's been threatening to activate Article 80 for a good year and a half now. His allies have been threatening it since he got elected. When Kais Saied was elected, his allies were saying there would be a coup, that Kais Saied would take control. In other words, now that Saied has found himself in this environment in which there are angry protests, everybody hates the parliament, people hate the political parties, they see them as corrupt. Now that he has the backing of the security forces, he has the backing of France, of the UAE, of Saudi Arabia. The UAE is helping him to get Washington on board. Saied believes now is the ideal time within which to move. And this is the key point. The reason Kais Saied didn't move earlier was because he couldn't. Because people like me, for example, a Tunisian who voted for Kais Saied, I did not vote for Kais Saied because I supported him. I voted for Kais Saied in the second round because I was caught between him and another candidate who was accused of corruption and associated with the corrupt business community. And Kais Saied found great difficulty in trying to differentiate who actually supports him or who voted him out of support for him and who, like me, voted him because he had no other choice. That's why Saied didn't move, and he waited for this sort of perfect storm to take place in terms of the protests, the international support, the heavy pressure now being applied on parliament, the stalemate that is taking place in the political realm, in that Kais Saied is now refusing to sign laws passed by Parliament, and the absence of a Supreme Court to decide these constitutional issues. This Supreme Court that ironically was decided on in 2015, and it was Ennahda that is now under the greatest threat, that delayed the implementation of the Supreme Court, that resisted the implementation of the Supreme Court because they wanted to be the ones to interpret the Constitution. Now it seems that the hole that they dug has come back to bite them, in that Saied, in the absence of the Constitutional Court, the president now is able to interpret it as he wishes, with no one to tell him, no, Mr. President, you're wrong. So it's sort of this culmination of these events that sort of come together that result in this coup. But the last point I will make on this is that it's important to stress, no Tunisian is surprised by what Kais Saied has done. Everybody foresaw it. Everybody expected it. If you read the articles by Tunisian journalists over the past year, they've all been alluding that this is coming, and it was a matter of inevitability, primarily because Ennahda believed that the democracy argument would keep people on board. And the reality is that the democracy argument no longer works on the Tunisians. It doesn't bring bread on the table. And now we see a similar situation to Egypt, whereby the people are saying, listen, don't talk to me about democracy or democratic processes. I want Ennahda out. I blame them for the crisis. I want order, stability, even if that comes via dictatorship. That's the trajectory we appear to be heading.
So, given all these stakeholders that seem to be supporting the president, is he going to get away with it?
I think it's clear that the coup is going very smoothly at the moment. I think that when President Kais Saied announced the Article 80, the reality is that the security forces, or the army, which is supposed to be the protector of the constitution, the army proceeded to shut off parliament and surround it and prevent members of parliament from entering, i.e. implementing the decision of Kais Saied. On the night of the protest, the security forces union, which represents the security forces, announced a declaration that the offices of the Ennahda party that are being burnt or being stormed by protesters would not be protected by the security forces, and that party members would have to protect themselves, a dereliction of the most basic duty of the security force. But it was a sign that the security forces are leaning more towards Kais Saied. The storming of the Al Jazeera offices of foreign media in Tunisia and the lack of international reaction to that suggests that there is this mood that is willing to entertain what Kais Saied has done. And today, with Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, with his phone call to Kais Saied, he described it as a good phone call. He did not describe it as a concerning phone call. He did not describe it as a frank or constructive this sort of diplomatic language that implies concern. Blinken said it was a good phone call, implying that what he heard from Kais Saied with regards to his coup is that Kais Saied is saying that everything I'm doing is constitutional, support me and back me, and I will envelop this coup in democratic terms, in a democratic form. I will wipe out my opponents, but I will make sure that I do it in the name of democracy, so that I don't force you, or I don't force your hand, I don't force you to get involved. So it appears that for now, the coup seems to be going well. The mighty trade unions, who are a very powerful force in Tunisia, during the 12 hours after the announcement of Article 80, they didn't move. And then we saw the leader of the trade unions go to the presidential palace, sit beside the president as he announced that he would continue on this course, suggesting that the trade unions are willing to go along with the president to some extent with regards to where he's going. The trade unions, we know, are looking for a national dialogue. It's unclear whether Kais Saied will do so. But the rumors now are that the Kais Saied, following the success of Article 80, following the lack of international backlash, following the lack of domestic backlash, there are people who support this coup. Following the lack of domestic backlash, the move that Kais Saied is expected to do is to suspend the constitution itself. So remember, he suspended parliament through the constitution. Now he's expected to suspend the constitution itself and rule directly, in that now he has the executive power. He's lifted the immunity from members of parliament, meaning he can now prosecute the members of Ennahda who have antagonized him and prevented him from taking power before. And he's also assumed the role of the prosecutor general. So now the attorney general, who would normally prosecute corruption and the like, the president now holds that power, essentially meaning that he has the same powers now as Ben Ali, who was overthrown in 2011, and Bourguiba before him. This sort of mighty dictatorial powers that means he can put in prison whoever he wishes and purge his opponents.
The opposition party, if we can call it that, the largest party in parliament, Ennahda, and we talk about Rachid Ghannouchi, he had called for mass demonstrations, and in fact, he had tried to do a sit-in outside Parliament, but they didn't seem to get as much support as he had hoped. It sounds as if his language and his tone has changed. Is that an acknowledgement that perhaps that the balance of power has shifted and that he's not as popular, his party is not as popular as before? And if that is the case, what next for Ennahda?
The prevalent theory in Tunisia is that in the last presidential elections, there was a huge debate that took place within the Ennahda party. Ghannouchi did not want to put a candidate. Ghannouchi's argument was that if we put a presidential candidate, it will become clear how much our power has declined, and that our strength today, as in he's speaking on behalf of himself, I'm not Ennahda, but he's speaking on behalf of himself. He said that if Ennahda runs for this presidential elections, then the imagination of the people in that Ennahda is stronger than it is, will dissipate. His party got angry with him and overruled him. There was a unanimous vote within the party that they would put a presidential candidate, and they were summarily defeated. Abdel Fattah Moro, who was their candidate, didn't even make the second round of the presidential elections. And suddenly, after that result, everybody suddenly realized just how weak Ennahda had become. Remember, in 2011, this is a party that got 1.5 million votes in a 3.5 million electorate. So we're talking about 40% of the vote. In 2014, they got 800,000 or almost a million. In 2019, they got 400,000. So in other words, you can see the decline in that they went from 90-something seats and to today having about 52, 51 seats, and you need 109 for a majority, implying that Ennahda needs an alliance with 4 other parties in order to be able to form a government all ruled by majority. So Ghannouchi is well aware that the popularity has dwindled. More than that is that Ennahda is the only party that is surviving from the parties that have ruled Tunisia. So from 2011, you had Marzouki. Marzouki has vanished from the political scene after being blamed for a lot of the chaos in Tunisia. SABC in 2014, the Nida Tunis party, has disintegrated. People are saying that given that Ennahda is the common denominator over the past 10 years, they are the primary cause of all of the misery that's in Tunisia today. I do not exaggerate when I say that if the devil himself were to come from hellfire and say to the Tunisians, I will rid you of Ennahda, Tunisians will vote for the devil to do so. And this is what's important to stress with regards to Kais Saied's coup, in that the people who support him in it, the people who are celebrating the coup, are not celebrating it because it is Kais Saied who is doing it. Rather, it is the allies who are supporting Kais Saied are unified not in support of Kais Saied. They are rather unified in the collective hatred of Ennahda. They all want to see Ennahda gone. Ennahda now is the lightning rod for all of the woes, for all of the dissatisfaction in Tunisia today. Rightly or wrongly is irrelevant. This is the popular perception, and this is why it was Ennahda offices that were burnt and that were stormed by the protesters during this latest series of protests. So Ghannouchi is well aware, and one of the reasons that is touted why he ran for election this time, because as leader of the party, he didn't run in 2011, he didn't run in 2014, but he ran in this election, is because they say that he anticipated this and wanted that immunity that an MP has to protect himself. And this is why Kais Saied's coup is so dangerous, in that Article 80 doesn't let him lift immunity from the members of parliament. That's something that he has assumed himself without any legal basis. He has no right to lift immunity from the members of parliament. But he's done that because he has a target in mind, and Said's target is Ennahda. He is now going to dangle Ennahda in front of the Tunisian people and say to them, listen, all of your anger, all of your misery is because of these people. And it's expected that they will be put before the courts, they will be accused of assassinations, they will be accused of corruption, and they will essentially be offered as a sacrificial lamb to temper the anger of the Tunisians, and that will be the justification of the coup, just as Sisi did with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. So with regards to your question with Rashid Ghannouchi, he's well aware that his popularity has dwindled, and that's why today he's come out and said, I'm willing to engage in a national dialogue, a statement that he did not make when he was in clashing with Kais Saied before. Ghannouchi knows that he's in survival mode and his time is running out. If he doesn't pull a rabbit out of a hat, it appears that Kais Saied is going to wipe them out completely.
All right, so perhaps finally, coming back to the story you told about voting for the other guy as opposed to voting for something, maybe the Tunisians need to be careful what they wish for, because the reality is Tunisia is the third most affected country with COVID-19 on the continent, even though it has a population of just 11 million. That is not going to go away miraculously just by getting rid of Inada. And you talked about the economic woes. These are things that the president will have to make huge strides in very quickly if the Kais Saied project is to succeed.
I think it's important to stress that, in my opinion, even if all of the Tunisians were with Kais Saied's coup, that does not make it justified. That does not justify the moving of the goalposts and removing the democratic process as the arbiter and process through which to transfer power. By adopting a coup, by adopting ultra-virus measures, by adopting illegal measures to do so, you've broken a social contract that was formed in 2011 when Ben Ali fell. The problem in Tunisia is that we had a dictatorship. We did not have a smooth transfer of power. It was either Ben Ali or war. This is the Tunisians, it was expected, had moved away from that, in that no matter how bad the government gets, there will be elections, and elections is the arbiter. Elections are the way that we get rid of the government. Elections are the way that we bring about change. Kais Saied has trampled on all of that, as have the Tunisians who support Kais Saied. And that has dangerous ramifications, especially for a country that is neighboring Libya and a country that is in a region in which Syria is not too far off, and neither is Yemen and neither is Niger and these other places that are embroiled in conflict. So it's important to stress that this is the significance of what Kais Saied has done. And this is perhaps why the Tunisians who support Kais Saied, in reality, in my opinion, are deluded. Because Sisi's coup in Egypt is a valuable lesson. Sisi, the reality is that when he did his coup, there were many Egyptians who were for it. There were many members of civil society who supported him. There were many civil society organizations and institutions that went along with Sisi's coup because they hated the Muslim Brotherhood and they wanted them out by any means. And they knew full well that they would not be able to beat the Muslim Brotherhood in the elections. It's important to stress in this Tunisia case that the parties that are supporting Kais Saied's coup are those parties that have consistently failed to convince the Tunisians to vote for them. Ennahda has been the most successful party in the electorate. That's the reality. Every time there is elections, Ennahda wins. But the groups that can't win democratically are now supporting this coup. And that's why I think Tunisia now is in a very dangerous phase. And before even we deal with the economy, the reality is this. Now that you've removed democracy as the arbiter, as the means by which to transfer power, Kais Saied will find himself in front of two options. Either he solves the economic crises or he represses and uses force to prevent the people from protesting and forcefully removing him. Because now you have not offered the people a means by which they can choose an alternative. And I think that's the danger. The economic crisis will take time. It requires patience. And I think what the government of Tunisia has failed to understand, and the governments before it, is that you need to engage the population and you need justice. You need to treat them fairly. You cannot develop rich regions and ignore poorer regions. You have to have a rhetoric that shows that we're all in this together. And the government's failed in that miserably. But I think with regards to the economy, it's not going to get better anytime soon. The country is on the verge of bankruptcy. The IMF are imposing crippling conditions, including the lifting of subsidies that are going to affect the poorest first, who can't even afford the basic amenities such as water and electricity. And this is why when we look at what Kais Saied has done, the reality is this. His only option to cement his coup will be by using repression, will be by purging his opponents, will be by relying on the UAE lobbying Washington to turn a blind eye to human rights abuses, will be relying on France to lobby the European Union to ignore the human rights oppressions that are coming, the human rights abuses that are going to come soon, because it's the only way Kais Saied will be able to justify his coup, because it has no legal basis. And this is why I think that Tunisia, this is the tragedy, this is the saddest story of the Arab Spring, because it was supposed to be the success, it was supposed to be the source. And I, as somebody from Sidi Bouzid, from the very town that launched the Arab Spring Revolution, you can see how things have changed in 10 years, in that even people in my hometown, those who are on the front lines of the revolution, are celebrating this coup, because the reality is that they took to the streets to see development, to see prosperity, to see jobs, and to see food on the table. And the democratic process of 10 years has not brought any of that. And the reality is that while I think in principle we should be protecting our democratic transitions, it's hard to tell a starving man who doesn't know when his next meal is that he should also be protecting the democratic transition that has ignored him for 10 years and has brought him no benefit whatsoever.